a debate between an atheist and a Muslim on the topic of the dilemma of atheism in denying the unseen. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, distinguished attendees, esteemed participants in this debate, we meet today to delve into one of the most fundamental philosophical issues and one of the most influential in shaping humanity's worldview, the issue of the unseen versus the observed. We are about to unravel an epistemological dilemma that lies between two opposing sides. The first believes that the human mind is bound by the limits of experience and the senses, and therefore, whatever cannot be subjected to the empirical scientific method remains outside the realm of certain knowledge. The second side believes that the unseen is not the antithesis of reason, but rather a broader horizon that reason calls upon to understand the causes of existence and the purpose of humanity, and that attempting to confine existence to matter is itself an unproven assumption. The essence of this debate lies not in proving or disproving one side, but rather in examining the epistemological foundations upon which each perspective rests. Is the empirical scientific method alone capable of encompassing all the truths of existence? Where do the boundaries lie between what is rationally impossible and what is not perceptible to the senses? And how can a model of belief in the unseen offer a coherent explanation of reality, while a materialist model seeks to provide a self-sufficient explanation? In this session, we aspire to a dialogue where argument is supported by evidence and biases are set aside, so that we may place on the table of intellectual inquiry the dimensions of atheism in its denial of the unseen and the dimensions of belief in its affirmation, recognizing that truth, regardless of our perspectives on it, is the ultimate goal we seek to reach through this intellectual exchange. So, welcome to all, and let us begin with God's blessing. Paragraph 1. The Muslim said, the atheist, on the other hand, believes in another hidden truth that he creates himself, such as the belief that the universe arose by chance, that life appeared without a creator, or that human consciousness spontaneously sprang from inert matter.
The atheist commented, lies, lies, nothing but lies. No one, not even the atheist, claims such nonsense. Moreover, again, there is no distinction whatsoever between atheism, cosmology, and the theory of evolution. Isn't it sad that Islam is defended only with such twisted tricks? Without lies, Islam would die.
The Muslim replied, the claim that everything said is a lie is not a debate, but merely an emotional outburst. Intellectual debates are not based on general accusations, but on exposing errors with evidence and detailed explanations. Moreover, the distinction between atheism, cosmology, and the theory of evolution is well established and needs no further clarification. No one claims that the theory of evolution is synonymous with atheism, or that cosmology is a religion in its own right. The real problem, however, lies in the fact that many atheists attempt to use these scientific theories to offer a purely materialistic explanation of existence, then move from describing phenomena to denying the creator. This is where the real philosophical debate begins. Empirical science explains how things work, but the questions remain. Why does the universe exist? Why do the laws of nature exist? Where do consciousness, reason, logic, and values come from? These are philosophical and existential questions that laboratories cannot answer. It is paradoxical that some Muslims demand that criticism of atheism be avoided, while they themselves portray any discussion of it as an attack on religion and dismiss it as pure slander. The statement without lies, Islam will die, is simply an emotional claim devoid of any evidence. Islam has been present and influential for over 14 centuries, challenging countless civilizations, philosophies, empires, and intellectual movements, yet it has not disappeared. On the contrary, it continues to generate ideas, doctrines, civilizations, and millions of believers worldwide. If it were based solely on lies, it wouldn't have withstood all this criticism, scrutiny, and ongoing intellectual debate.
The atheist responds, by claiming that everything I said is a lie, you are attributing to me words I never uttered. What you quoted is a blatant lie, clearly intended to ascribe to atheism opinions that don't belong to it, in order to exploit supposed dilemmas of atheism. The fact that we, still, lack answers to many of the questions posed is not a fault of atheism, because faith offers very little in the way of these questions. it provides only false answers with no explanatory value. Criticizing atheism isn't limited to criticizing atheist statements that have no bearing on atheism. The only meaningful response to atheism is evidence, proof, and evidence for the existence of at least one God. This evidence has not yet been presented. Otherwise, atheism wouldn't exist.
The Muslim response. The fundamental problem with this argument lies in its reduction of atheism to mere disbelief, thereby stripping it of any philosophical or epistemological significance. In reality, contemporary atheism is rarely presented as a completely neutral, negative stance. Rather, it is often associated with a materialistic worldview that rejects the unseen and metaphysical, claiming that the universe, life, and mind can be explained without a creator, purpose, or intention. When a big questions about the origin of existence, the reason for the order of the universe, the emergence of consciousness, the nature of mathematical and logical laws, and the meaning of moral values are raised, atheism cannot simply answer. We don't have an answer yet. The absence of an answer is not merely epistemological neutrality. It becomes a genuine dilemma when faced with the categorical rejection of any metaphysical or theological explanation. The claim that faith offers only wrong answers is a preconceived notion unsupported by evidence. Theological explanations are not merely about filling gaps, as is sometimes portrayed, but rather constitute a comprehensive philosophical explanation that links the existence, order, and comprehension of the universe to the existence of rational and moral laws. Even the greatest philosophers and scientists in history did not consider the idea of a creator a useless explanation. On the contrary, many of them saw it as more consistent with the principles of causality and rationality than the assumption of an eternal universe without a cause or an order without a creator. Moreover, the statement, if there were proof of God's existence, there would be no atheism, is not a logical argument, because disagreement or rejection does not negate truth. Throughout history, there have been people who denied even the most basic axioms, and even the existence of objective facts or established moral principles. The continuation of the debate not necessarily mean the absence of evidence, but may simply mean that people differ in their interpretation or acceptance of it. Moreover, belief in God is not based on a single, isolated piece of evidence, but on a comprehensive set of rational, philosophical, cosmological, moral, and historical evidence. This contradicts the fact that atheism itself has yet to offer a conclusive explanation for the existence of something rather than nothing, nor a definitive explanation for the emergence of consciousness, reason, and meaning within a purely materialistic framework. The Muslims said, the claim that faith offers only wrong answers is a preconceived notion unsupported by evidence.
The atheist responds, I await your counterargument. Provide even a single logical answer that proves the existence of your God and his crucial role.
The Muslims said, but based on a comprehensive set of rational, philosophical, cosmological, ethical, and historical evidence.
The atheist responds, why all the rambling? Finally, offer something of maximum persuasive power. So far, I have read nothing but the usual lengthy claims.
The Muslims said that atheism itself does not offer a conclusive explanation for the existence of something rather than nothing, nor a definitive explanation for the emergence of consciousness, reason, and meaning within a purely materialistic framework.
The atheist responds, you overestimate atheism. By its very nature, it cannot offer any answers. It simply answers the question of God's existence with no. The mere absence of answers, which atheism cannot provide, does not validate the absurd and spurious explanations that faith attempts to promote. The responsibility for proving the validity of one's claims rests with the Muslim. If one fails to do so, then atheism becomes the only rational position.
The Muslim replies, the burden of proof is not one-sided, as some claim, nor is it a matter of conclusive mathematical proof or complete refutation, but rather two competing interpretations of reality. Moreover, it is clear that belief in God rests on a body of rational evidence, not on mere empty claims. For example, you demand a single decisive proof, as if important philosophical questions could be resolved by a single laboratory experiment or a single conclusive mathematical equation. However, even in the most fundamental intellectual matters, this standard does not apply. We do not prove the existence of other states of consciousness, the objectivity of morality, or the validity of rational thought itself with direct empirical evidence, but rather with a body of supporting evidence and inferences. As for your question about a rational proof of God's existence, consider this example. Why does something exist instead of nothing? Science describes how matter and energy evolve in the universe, but it does not explain why the universe itself, with its laws and constants, exists and is not absolute nothingness. If everything in the universe were accidental and without a cause, the question of the universe's origin would remain open. The assumption of a first cause, a necessary being that does not require an external cause, is a rational philosophical explanation that has been debated for centuries, not merely a religious claim. While your assertion that atheism claims to offer no explanation, merely denying the existence of God, is partially true, this does not automatically make atheism the only rational position. Refusing to offer an explanation does not preclude the existence of a competing one. The question remains, which perspective explains reality more comprehensively and with fewer contradictions? Furthermore, faith seeks to explain not only the existence of the universe, but also its comprehensibility, the existence of consciousness, the objectivity of moral values, and the origin of meaning. An atheist can reject these explanations, and that is their right, but mere rejection does not constitute refutation. The problem is not that faith has proven nothing and atheism has triumphed, but rather the need for an open philosophical debate about which explanation of existence best aligns with the totality of rational, cosmological, and human data. Even today, there is no philosophical or scientific consensus that atheism, as you claim, is an inevitable result of reason. Paragraph 2. The Muslims said, while some atheists try to portray belief in the unseen as a kind of delusion or escapism, humans spend their entire lives relying on the unseen. The future is hidden. Tomorrow is hidden. What will happen in an hour is hidden.
The atheist commented. First, it is dishonest to boast about the title, The Dilemma of Atheism, and then hide, for the second time, behind the phrase, some atheists. Second, this argument is completely illogical. What can be hidden is only what exists now. The future, tomorrow, and, in an hour, are things that have not yet come, they do not exist. Therefore, they cannot be hidden. It is merely empty talk from a self-proclaimed expert.
The Muslim responded. First, there is no contradiction between discussing the dilemma of atheism and using the phrase some atheists. Atheism is not a single, homogeneous school of thought, but rather encompasses diverse and sometimes even contradictory currents. When a certain opinion of some atheists is criticized, this is an accurate description, not hiding as you claim. Otherwise, generalizing this to all atheists would be a logical fallacy. Secondly, you seem to have confused immediate temporal existence with knowledge and understanding of the future. When the future is said to be unknown, it means it is not revealed to humanity and is hidden from us, not that it actually exists in the present in a physical form that can be concealed. We all use this meaning daily. Asterisk we say, no one knows what tomorrow holds. Asterisk we say, the future is unknown. We talk about things hidden from us. No reasonable person would interpret this to mean that tomorrow already exists physically and that someone has hidden it. The fundamental philosophical and epistemological point lies in the limitations of human perception. There are facts and events that will unfold for us over time. Therefore, the concept of hidden refers to the limits of human knowledge, not to the physical existence of things in the present moment. Simply dismissing an argument as superficial or vague without addressing the core idea is not a philosophical response, but rather an attempt to distort the opposing viewpoint through emotional tactics instead of objective discussion. Simply dismissing an argument as superficial or vague without addressing the core idea is not a philosophical response, but rather an attempt to distort the opposing viewpoint through emotional appeals instead of objective debate.
The atheist comments. Atheism has only two forms, negative and positive. The negative, I don't believe in gods. The positive, I believe there are no gods. Anything else is not part of atheism. Therefore, atheism is not a school of thought or a movement, and certainly not a worldview. It is simply the answer to one question. I was merely pointing out the clear contradiction between the title, Atheism, and the phrase, some atheists, in both cases, especially since the statements mentioned do not belong to the atheism whose dilemma was supposed to be addressed. You didn't say, unknown, but hidden, and the hidden presupposes existence. This is an error in your usage, not in my interpretation. I didn't use the words superficial or obscure. Another piece of advice: if you want your criticisms of atheism to be taken seriously, don't focus on the alleged claim that you don't belong to the atheist movement, but rather provide evidence and proofs for the existence of one God. Then no sane person would remain an atheist.
The Muslim response: reducing atheism to a narrow linguistic definition as simply disbelief in gods does not solve the philosophical problem. It only superficially addresses it. When atheism develops into an intellectual stance that addresses questions of existence, the universe, consciousness, and ethics, it becomes, in reality, more than just a simplistic answer to a single question. This is why most contemporary atheistic discourse is associated with materialism, naturalism, or the denial of the unseen, even when it is argued theoretically that these aspects are not part of atheism itself. When an atheist rejects any explanation beyond matter and nature, and then demands that only believers provide a comprehensive explanation, it is natural to discuss the intellectual implications of this rejection, not merely the linguistic definition of the word atheism. Regarding the phrase "some atheist," it is not a contradiction as it has been presented. The discussion has been about common models or intellectual currents within atheistic discourse, not about claiming that every atheist says exactly the same thing. Just as we say some philosophers or some believers without making a sweeping generalization about everyone. The objection to the word hidden is more of a linguistic fallacy than a philosophical one. Hidden here doesn't mean proving existence from the outset, but rather referring to something that cannot be directly perceived by the senses or that transcends the limits of current human understanding. Even in the natural sciences, we speak of hidden or invisible things before providing conclusive evidence of their existence, and this doesn't necessarily imply final acceptance of their existence. The repeated demand for proof of God's existence, as if the believer possesses nothing but an empty claim, ignores the fact that throughout history, belief in God has been based on a comprehensive system of rational and philosophical arguments, such as the argument from causality, the order of the universe, the validity of natural laws, the emergence of consciousness and reason, and the existence of moral values and abstract concepts. In contrast, atheism has yet to offer a conclusive explanation for the existence of the universe, the reasons for the existence of comprehensible rational laws, or the emergence of a conscious being from inanimate matter without purpose or intention. Therefore, the issue is not that one side possesses absolute knowledge while the other possesses nothing, but rather that both sides offer philosophical explanations for existence and then debate their validity and ability to answer fundamental questions. Finally, the statement, "then no rational person would remain an atheist," is not a logical argument, but a circular one. Throughout history, rational people have differed in philosophy, religion, science, and politics, each with their own arguments and methods of debate. Paragraph 3. The Muslims said, if man, as some atheists claim, is merely the product of random chemical reactions, then where do the immutable laws of reason come from? And how can one trust the judgments of reason if it is merely a blind product of the movement of matter?
The atheist commented. Herein lies the next lie. First, the theory of the origin of man or mind is not part of atheism. Second, no educated person can claim that the evolution of man and mind was accidental or blind. Clearly, someone here doesn't understand atheism, the theory of evolution, or the difference between them.
The Muslim replied, you are confusing two different things, the abstract theoretical definition of atheism, and the philosophical and epistemological implications of this definition for explaining existence, humanity, and reason. It is true that the theory of evolution itself is not atheism, but the question remains, how does an atheist explain the origin of mind, consciousness, and meaning? If one denies the existence of a creator or a higher intelligence that transcends nature, then only a purely materialistic, naturalistic explanation remains, no matter how much one tries to soften the terminology. The claim that evolution is neither random nor blind warrants further investigation. The theory itself is based on undirected mutations and unconscious natural selection. That is, it is a process without intention or a predetermined purpose, and this is precisely what is meant by blind, not that events occur without laws or order. There is a fundamental difference between the existence of cosmic order and natural laws, and the existence of intention, purpose, and conscious will behind this order. The criticism here is not directed at the empirical scientific method of studying living organisms, but rather at the philosophical interpretation that attempts to reduce the mind, consciousness, and human values to the product of unconscious material processes. Moreover, labeling someone who holds a dissenting opinion as uneducated is not a scientific argument, because the issue is fundamentally philosophical and deals with essential questions such as how did consciousness arise from unconscious matter? How do moral values arise from chemical reactions? Why should we trust the mind at all if it's merely a biological survival mechanism and not a means of discovering truth? These questions cannot be answered simply with "you don't understand evolution," but require well-founded philosophical responses.
The atheist comments. There is no other implication of atheism than that God plays no role. Explanations for the origin of the mind, consciousness, or meaning, for example, are not part of atheism. For many conceivable questions, we simply don't have an explanation yet. It is a clear fallacy to assume that just because atheists cannot answer certain questions, all other explanations, however absurd they may seem, are automatically correct. Belief in God offers no explanations either. It explains nothing at all, as long as these pseudo-answers remain mere claims and provide no proof of the existence or non-existence of a divine origin. Neither atheism nor naturalism necessitates materialism. This is demonstrably false. A survival mechanism and the search for truth are not contradictory. I look forward to your well-founded philosophical answers.
The Muslim response. The claim that atheism simply means the absence of God does not resolve the philosophical problem, but merely reformulates it. Excluding the Creator from the explanation of existence is not a completely neutral stance, but a philosophical decision with profound epistemological and logical implications. It is true in the narrow sense that the origin of mind, consciousness, or meaning is not part of atheism, but this does not change the fact that atheism, as a rejection of theological explanation, is practically obligated to explain how these phenomena are understood without a transcendent reference point. No one has claimed that an atheist's ignorance of some answers automatically legitimizes every other explanation. This is an oversimplification. The essential point is that it is philosophically legitimate to consider theological explanation as a logical possibility when atheistic or naturalistic explanations fail to provide a sufficient basis for explaining consciousness, values, mind, or the origin of natural laws, and not simply a ridiculous answer as portrayed here. The claim that belief in God explains nothing is itself unfounded. The concept of a creator in philosophy is not merely a word thrown into a void, but rather an attempt to explain the existence, order, and rational understanding of the universe. When we say that the universe possesses order and precise laws, the philosophical question goes beyond simply describing these laws. It goes further. Why do they exist at all? Why are they mathematically and rationally comprehensible? Why is there something rather than nothing? The theological explanation here does not claim to explain every scientific detail, but rather provides a metaphysical basis for the existence of order, reason, and law themselves. This is fundamentally different from the mere empty claim presented. Furthermore, denying the complete compatibility between atheism and materialism does not fundamentally alter the reality of current atheistic discourse, since most popular atheistic formulations ultimately rest on a naturalistic explanation of existence that excludes any agent beyond nature. Even if there are atheists who do not adhere to strict materialism, they remain philosophically obliged to explain the origin of mind, consciousness, and meaning within their own framework. The statement, "the means of survival and the search for truth are not contradictory," is partially true, but the philosophical problem runs deeper. If the mind, according to the purely materialistic theory of evolution, is a product of processes whose primary aim is survival and adaptation, not the attainment of truth, how can we guarantee the reliability of our grand rational conclusions when it comes to perceiving objective truth? This is not a fallacy, but an epistemological dilemma that has been discussed by many contemporary philosophers. Ultimately, the question is not who possesses the ultimate answer to everything, but which explanation offers the most coherent and comprehensive foundation for mind, existence, meaning, law, and morality. The divine explanation continues to play an important role in philosophical debate, not as a linguistic gap, but as a rational attempt to explain the origin of the system itself, rather than merely describing its phenomena.
The atheist comments. While it is true in the narrower, literal sense that the origin of mind, consciousness, or meaning is not part of atheism, this does not change the fact that atheism, as a rejection of divine explanation, is practically obligated to show how these phenomena can be understood without a transcendental point of reference. Here, your fundamental error becomes apparent once again: this obligation does not exist. Unlike theism, atheism does not claim to know corresponding explanations. The fundamental burden of proof, and thus the practical obligation, lies solely with the one making a claim, that is, with those who assert the existence of gods and their creation. Unfortunately, so far, despite your many words, you have not offered a single, rational attempt at an explanation for reason, existence, meaning, law, and morality. And certainly not a rational justification for the alleged existence of your God, which is, after all, a prerequisite for all explanations.
The Muslim replies, "You are conflating two different things, the burden of proof on the one hand, and the explanatory power of a philosophical position on the other. I agree with you that those who want to prove God's existence must provide rational justifications for it. This is precisely what philosophers and believers have been doing for centuries with arguments based on causality, existence, order, reason, morality, and so on. Some may be convinced by these arguments, others may reject them, but the fact that there is disagreement does not mean that they do not exist. The flaw in your argument, however, lies in the assumption that atheism is entirely exempt from any explanatory scrutiny. If an atheist does not simply say, 'I don't know,' but rejects divine explanations because he considers them unnecessary or false, the question is intellectually legitimate. What alternative explanation justifies this rejection? It is true that atheism, in its narrow definition, does not offer a comprehensive theory of the universe, the mind, or morality. However, when atheism is presented as the most rational position or as a sufficient alternative to theistic explanations, it automatically enters the realm of comparative interpretation and not merely the realm of passive rejection. Regarding your claim that I have not provided an explanation for reason, meaning, or morality, the theistic explanation for these is well known and clear. Reason is intelligible because the origin of the universe is a mind capable of understanding an order. Moral values are objective because they are based on a reference point that transcends human desires, and meaning is possible because existence is not a random, meaningless event. One may reject these explanations or consider them inadequate, but it is wrong to claim that they do not exist at all. The key question is not, do theistic explanations exist? Rather, which explanation is better suited to explaining reality as we know it, the explanati? On that traces consciousness, reason, meaning, and morality back to a transcendent foundation, or the explanation that merely states that these phenomena ultimately arose from unconscious material processes. Philosophical discussions don't end with a demand for proof. They begin with a comparison of the explanatory power of competing perspectives. This shifts the debate from the simple question, who bears the burden of proof, to a deeper one, which worldview possesses the greatest explanatory power for human and cosmic reality. This is a question that the opponent can hardly ignore by simply asserting, atheism makes no claims.